My son Derek called me on a Thursday evening in October, his voice bright with what I thought was excitement, but his next words made my stomach drop. "Dad, you're paying $75,000 for my wedding because after all the problems you've caused this family, you should be grateful I'm even letting you contribute." I laughed, certain it was some terrible joke. But when the FedEx envelope arrived 2 days later with itemized bills and his handwritten note banning me from the ceremony itself, I knew he was deadly serious. 3 weeks later, on November 18th, they discovered what real consequences looked like. They never saw it coming. But 10 weeks earlier, everything had been different. The envelope had arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in late August. I'd been working in my garage workshop, refinishing an old oak table I'd found at an estate sale, when I heard the mail truck rumble past. The mechanical hum of my sander had drowned out most of the world that day, with dust catching the late summer light filtering through the small window above my workbench. I'd been expecting something from Derek, maybe a wedding invitation finally, after months of hearing about the engagement through mutual acquaintances and distant relatives who seemed to know more about my son's life than I did. The Charleston heat pressed against the garage walls. August in South Carolina meant breathing through soup, but I'd grown used to it over 37 years of living here. The house on Maple Grove Avenue wasn't much. A modest 2-bedroom ranch with vinyl siding that had faded from cream to something closer to pale yellow. But it was mine. Well, mine and the bank's. The second mortgage I'd taken out 8 years ago, when Rachel got sick, still had another decade of payments attached to it. I set down the sander, wiped my hands on my work jeans. The denim had worn soft from years of use, thin at the knees, paint-stained at the thighs. These were the pants I wore when I worked on projects, when I needed to feel useful, when the silence of the house became too heavy and I needed the distraction of creating something with my hands. The FedEx envelope sat on my front porch. Thick, official-looking. My name and address printed in clean, impersonal letters across the front. I picked it up, felt the weight of multiple pages inside, and something in my chest tightened. Not excitement, something else. Something that tasted like copper pennies and old regrets. Inside, I found 3 separate invoices, each on heavy cardstock with embossed letterhead. Westmont Manor Estate Rental, $45,000. Sterling Culinary Catering Services, $18,000. Paradise Maui Resort Honeymoon Suite, $12,000. The numbers blurred together, reforming into a total that made the room spin slightly. $75,000. Attached to the invoices with a silver paperclip was a handwritten note on Derek's personal stationery. His handwriting, the same precise architectural lettering he'd developed in high school when he'd decided that cursive was for people without ambition, cut across the page like a legal verdict. "Dad, after the problems you've caused the family, be grateful that I allowed you to contribute. This covers your share. Payment due by October 15th. Wire transfer details below." Derek. I sat down at my kitchen table. The same table where Derek had done his homework 25 years ago, where Rachel and I had shared breakfast every morning before her diagnosis, where I'd eaten dinner alone for the past 8 years. The Formica surface had a crack running through it now, patched with clear epoxy that caught the light and made the damage somehow more obvious. My share. As if I'd been consulted. As if I'd had any say in the Westmont Manor estate, which I'd driven past exactly once in my life and had never imagined stepping foot inside. As if I'd requested Maine lobster and imported French wines for guests who'd never bothered to visit me in the decade since Rachel's funeral. The problems I'd caused the family. My hands weren't shaking yet, but they would be. I knew that much about myself after 63 years. The trembling would come later, in the dark, when I lay in bed and replayed every moment of Derek's childhood, searching for the point where I'd failed him so completely that he'd become the stranger who sent invoices instead of invitations. I read the note again, looked for warmth, found none. The words were transactional, clinical, the language of someone closing a business deal with an unreliable vendor. Payment due. Wire transfer. Your share. The second page of the envelope contained more information. The wedding would take place on November 18, 2024, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Westmont Manor, which I learned from the attached brochure, sat on 75 acres of manicured gardens overlooking the Ashley River, with a grand ballroom that could accommodate 300 guests, Italian marble floors, crystal chandeliers imported from Prague, and a bridal suite that had hosted South Carolina governors and visiting celebrities. 300 guests. None of them me. The brochure showed photographs of previous weddings, women in designer gowns, men in tailored tuxedos, champagne towers and ice sculptures and floral arrangements that probably cost more than my monthly pension. This was Derek's world now. The world he'd built for himself after graduating from Georgia Tech with a degree in software engineering, after landing his position as a director at CloudSync Solutions, after meeting Vanessa Chun at a networking event for young professionals with upward trajectories and stock options. I'd met Vanessa exactly twice. Once at Derek's apartment last Christmas, when I'd shown up with a casserole dish of homemade enchiladas, Rachel's recipe, the one Derek had loved as a child, and Vanessa had barely glanced up from her phone long enough to offer a limp handshake. Her nails had been perfect, burgundy polish with tiny gold accents that caught the light. Professional manicure, clearly, the kind that cost $60 or $70 and required appointments booked weeks in advance. "We're going vegan now," Derek had said, taking the dish from my hands without meeting my eyes. "And honestly, Dad, showing up unannounced like this, it's awkward. We have plans. We're meeting Vanessa's parents for dinner at Peninsula Grill." Peninsula Grill, where entrees started at $48 and the wine list required a separate leather-bound menu. I'd driven home with the enchiladas still warm in the passenger seat, eaten them alone while watching a college football game I didn't care about, and thrown away the dish 2 days later when the food had started to turn. The dish had been Rachel's too. Blue ceramic with hand-painted flowers along the rim. She'd bought it at a craft fair in Savannah during our honeymoon, 36 years ago, when we'd been young and broke and stupid with love. The second time I'd met Vanessa was at a coffee shop in Mount Pleasant, a calculated encounter that Derek had scheduled through a series of increasingly formal text messages. "Father, we should discuss wedding logistics. Can you meet us at Harbor Bean Cafe on Saturday at 10 a.m.? Please confirm." I'd arrived 15 minutes early, ordered a small coffee, $2.37, no cream, no sugar, and waited at a corner table near the window. Derek and Vanessa had arrived exactly on time, which I'd learned over the years was Derek's way of establishing control. Never early, which implied eagerness. Never late, which suggested disrespect. Always precisely when scheduled, which communicated efficiency and professional boundaries. "Dad." Derek had shaken my hand. Actually shaken it like I was a business associate rather than the man who'd taught him to ride a bike and sat through every little league game and paid for his college textbooks when scholarships didn't cover everything. Vanessa had smiled. The smile hadn't reached her eyes. "Stephen, so nice to see you again." They'd ordered complicated drinks. Vanessa wanted a matcha latte with oat milk and honey. Derek ordered a cordial with an extra shot. The barista had recited their total, $13.46, without blinking, and Derek had paid with a titanium credit card that made a satisfying click against the counter. The conversation had been brief. Derek had a presentation prepared. Literally. He'd pulled up a document on his iPad and walked me through the wedding timeline, the venue selection process, the guest list demographics. 287 confirmed attendees. 73% were professional contacts from the tech industry. 18% were Vanessa's family and childhood friends. 9% were Derek's college associates and former colleagues. I'd done the math quickly in my head. That left 0% for me. For Rachel's side of the family. For the people who'd known Derek when he'd been a gap-toothed kid who collected baseball cards and built elaborate Lego cities on our living room floor. "We've decided on a sophisticated aesthetic," Vanessa had explained, scrolling through photographs on her phone. "Classic elegance with modern touches. The color palette is champagne, rose gold, and ivory. We've hired Maya Cross as our photographer. She shoots exclusively for Fortune 500 executives and their families. Her rate is $8,000 for the day, but her portfolio speaks for itself. $8,000. For photographs. I'd paid a friend $200 to photograph my wedding to Rachel, and we'd gotten exactly 83 pictures, half of them slightly blurred, all of them perfect because they captured the joy we'd felt standing in that small church with our families around us. The menu," Derek had continued, is a fusion of contemporary American cuisine and traditional French techniques. We've selected a 7-course tasting menu with wine pairings. The caterer sources everything locally except for the Maine lobster and the Burgundy wines, which are imported specifically for the event. I nodded, sipped my coffee. It had gone cold. Vanessa and I have been discussing family contributions, Derek had said, and his voice had shifted then, becoming carefully neutral. Given the scale of the event and the associated costs, we think it's reasonable for family members to participate financially. What kind of contributions? I'd asked. Vanessa's hand had found Derek's across the table. Her engagement ring, 3 carats, emerald cut, platinum setting, caught the morning light streaming through the cafe windows. We've calculated fair shares based on family size and, well, historical investment in the relationship. Historical investment in the relationship. As if love could be quantified on a spreadsheet. As if the 22 years I'd spent raising Derek, the orthodontist appointments and science fair projects and college application essays, the nights Rachel and I had sat at that cracked Formica table reviewing our budget to figure out how to pay for his SAT prep course. As if none of that counted because we hadn't been wealthy. My parents are covering the rehearsal dinner, Vanessa had continued. They've reserved the private room at Magnolia's. That's $38,000. Derek's Uncle Tom is handling the bar service, which runs about $22,000 for premium liquor. And we thought you might want to contribute to the venue, catering, and honeymoon expenses. The math had clicked into place with the weight of a cell door closing. $75,000. They'd already decided, already calculated my fair share without asking if I had $75 in my checking account, let alone $75,000. That's, I started, then stopped. The words had tangled in my throat. That's a significant amount. We understand it's a stretch, Derek had said, and his tone had been so carefully patronizing that something hot and sharp had twisted in my chest. But frankly, Dad, after everything, after the way things went with Mom, we think you owe us this. Consider it making amends. The way things went with Mom. Rachel had died on March 17, 2016. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Diagnosis to death in 8 months. We'd done everything the doctors recommended, chemotherapy, radiation, a clinical trial that had cost $47,000 out of pocket because our insurance had classified it as experimental. I'd taken a second mortgage on the house. Sold my truck and bought a 15-year-old Honda Civic. Worked overtime at the engineering firm until they gently suggested I might want to consider retirement because my performance was suffering from exhaustion. None of it had been enough. The cancer had spread too fast, moved too aggressively, ignored every treatment we'd thrown at it. Rachel had died in our bedroom. In our bed, holding my hand and telling me she loved me and that I'd done everything I could. Her last words had been for Derek. Tell him I'm proud of him, she'd whispered. Tell him to be kind. Derek had called once after the funeral. March 24, 2016, at 2:47 in the afternoon. I remembered because I'd been sitting in the funeral home parking lot, trying to decide if I could afford the mahogany casket or if I needed to choose the pine alternative that cost $3,000 less. The phone had rung. Derek's name on the screen. I'd answered with something like hope in my chest. Dad, he'd said, his voice flat and cold as lake ice. I've been thinking, you should have done more. For Mom. For all of us. Better doctors. Better treatments. If you'd been more successful, if you'd planned better, maybe she'd still be here. I'd sat in that parking lot for 2 hours after he hung up. Watched other families come and go, making their own terrible decisions about caskets and burial plots and flower arrangements. Eventually, I'd gone back inside and chosen the pine casket because it was what I could afford, and Rachel wouldn't have cared anyway. She'd always said that love mattered more than luxury, that being rich meant having people you cared about, not things you owned. That coffee shop conversation had ended with Derek and Vanessa standing up simultaneously, perfectly synchronized like they'd practiced the movement. Think about it, Derek had said. We'll need your decision by the end of September. The venue requires final payment 60 days before the event. I thought about it. For 6 weeks, I'd thought about almost nothing else. $75,000. My entire retirement savings was $62,000. My pension was $2,200 a month. Social Security was another $1,800. That was $40 a day to live on after I paid the mortgage, utilities, insurance, and property taxes. The FedEx envelope had arrived on August 27th. September had bled into October. The October 15th payment deadline had come and gone without a word from me, without a wire transfer, without any acknowledgement that I'd received the invoices at all. I'd expected Derek to call, to ask, to maybe, possibly, show some small flicker of concern about whether his father could actually afford what he was demanding. Instead, I got a text message on October 17th, 2 days after the deadline. Payment overdue. Wire by Friday or there will be consequences. D. Not dad. Not father. Just D. That was when the anger started. Not the hot, explosive kind that makes you throw things or shout or slam doors. The cold kind. The calculated kind. The kind that sits in your chest like a block of ice and clarifies your thinking until every thought becomes sharp and purposeful. I spent 8 years sacrificing. 8 years living on ramen noodles and generic brand cereal and coffee I made at home because Starbucks was an unnecessary luxury. 8 years patching my work boots with duct tape and wearing the same 3 pairs of jeans until the fabric was translucent at the knees. 8 years sending Derek birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside. All I could afford, and getting nothing back, not even a text message acknowledging receipt. Derek had called once in 8 years. Once. On that terrible day in the funeral home parking lot when he'd blamed me for Rachel's death. Every Christmas, I'd driven to his apartment with homemade food because I couldn't afford expensive gifts. Every year, I'd been turned away or tolerated for exactly 15 minutes before Derek manufactured an excuse about prior commitments. Last Christmas, the enchiladas. The year before, a pecan pie that Rachel used to make, the recipe perfected over decades of Sunday dinners. The year before that, a beef stew in a slow cooker I'd borrowed from my neighbor because mine had finally died after 23 years of use. Each time, Derek had taken my offerings with the same barely concealed impatience, the same carefully maintained distance, the same subtle suggestions that I was embarrassing him by showing up in my old Civic, wearing my worn jacket, being poor in a way that didn't fit his new aesthetic of success. The problems I'd caused the family. I caused problems by not being wealthy, by not having the resources to save Rachel with better doctors and experimental treatments that might not have worked anyway, by not being the kind of father who could hand over $75,000 without blinking, by being a retired mechanical engineer who lived on a pension instead of a tech director with stock options and a titanium credit card. The anger clarified into something else. Purpose. I'd spent my entire career solving mechanical problems, designing systems, finding elegant solutions to complex challenges. My specialty had been failure analysis, taking apart machines that had broken down and understanding exactly what had gone wrong, exactly what sequence of events had led to catastrophe. Derek had made a mistake. He'd provided me with detailed information about his wedding. Vendors, timelines, locations, costs. He'd given me the tools I needed to understand the system. And any system, if you understand it well enough, can be disrupted. I started with Vanessa's Instagram account. She'd made it public, a calculated decision designed to showcase her lifestyle to the largest possible audience. 14,000 followers. Every post carefully curated to project sophistication and success. Photographs of her and Derek at wine tastings, at charity galas, at rooftop restaurants with the Charleston skyline glowing behind them. She'd also posted extensively about wedding planning. Every vendor was tagged. Every service provider carefully credited. She'd built an entire narrative around the event, a months-long series of posts documenting her journey from engagement to wedding day. Maya Cross Photography, tagged in 17 posts. Sterling Culinary Catering Services, tagged in 9. Westmont Manor Estate, tagged in 12. Elegant Strings Quartet, tagged in 3. Petals and Promises Florist, tagged in 21. Each tag was a connection. Each connection was a vulnerability. I spent 3 days researching. I learned that Maya Cross Photography had a business phone number listed on their website, that Sterling Culinary operated out of a commercial kitchen in North Charleston and had a 24-hour emergency contact line. that Westmont Manor employed a full-time estate coordinator who handled all event logistics. I learned that Vanessa had posted about their final walkthrough at the venue, scheduled for November 10th, 8 days before the wedding. That she'd shared photographs of their catering tasting menu, complete with detailed timestamps and location tags. That she'd documented every aspect of their planning process with the kind of obsessive detail that people use when they want the world to see how perfect their lives are. She'd created a blueprint. I just needed to follow it. On October 22nd, I made my first phone call. Maya Cross Photography. A woman answered on the third ring, her voice professional and warm. Maya Cross Photography, this is Stephanie speaking. How can I help you? Hi Stephanie, I said, keeping my voice calm and apologetic. This is Derek Caldwell. I'm calling about our wedding on November 18th. We've had a family emergency come up, and I need to discuss some timing changes. There was a pause, the sound of keyboard keys clicking. Of course, Mr. Caldwell. Let me pull up your file. November 18th at Westmont Manor. Correct. That's right. What kind of changes are we looking at? I'd rehearsed this, practiced the tone, the phrasing, the small details that would make it believable. My father's had a health scare. Heart attack, actually. He's recovering, but the doctors aren't sure if he'll be able to attend. We're hoping he will, but we need to build in some flexibility with the schedule. What I'm thinking is that we might need to push the ceremony start time back by about 3 hours, from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Would that be possible? More keyboard clicks. A longer pause. That would be a significant change, Mr. Caldwell. Our contract specifies coverage from noon to 8 p.m. If you're starting at 6, that only gives us 2 hours for the ceremony and reception. And we've already blocked the day, turned down other bookings. I understand, I said, letting concern seep into my voice. And I apologize for the short notice. We're still hoping to keep the 3 p.m. start time, but I wanted to give you a heads up that there might be a change. My father means the world to us. If he can't make it at 3, we'd rather wait and have him there. You know? The lie sat bitter on my tongue. The fictional heart attack. The pretend concern. But something in my chest had gone numb, and the words came easily. I completely understand, Stephanie said, her voice softening. Family comes first. Let me make a note in your file that the timing might be flexible. But Derek, I'll need at least 48 hours notice if you're going to make a change that's significant. Otherwise, we might not be able to adjust our other bookings, and there could be additional fees. Of course, I'll keep you posted. Thank you for understanding. I hung up, stared at my phone. The first domino had wobbled but hadn't fallen yet. I needed to push harder. Over the next 2 weeks, I called every vendor. Same story, slightly different variations. Derek Caldwell, family emergency, timing concerns, might need to adjust the schedule. Each time, I followed up with an email from a new account I'd created, email protected, with a professional signature block that mimicked Derek's actual work email format. The emails were more specific, confirming our phone conversation about potential schedule changes. My father Stephen's health situation remains uncertain. We'll update you by November 15th with final timing. Appreciate your flexibility during this difficult time. I CC'd different email addresses on each message. The estate coordinator, the catering manager, the florist's business email. Created a web of communication that looked official and coordinated but was actually chaos in disguise, a carefully constructed system of misinformation. On November 1st, I sent a second round of emails. Update. Father's condition has stabilized. We're hoping to keep the original 3 p.m. ceremony time, but please plan for a possible 5 p.m. start as a backup. We'll confirm final timeline by November 16th. The vendors started responding, asking questions, seeking clarification. Each response went to my fabricated email account, not to Derek's real address. I replied to each one with slightly different information, creating contradictions and confusion. To the florist, delivery window is now 4 to 6 p.m. instead of 12 to 2 p.m. Please adjust accordingly. To the caterer, setup time needs to be pushed from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. due to venue access changes. Estate coordinator will confirm. To the string quartet, performance time may be delayed by 2 hours. We'll provide final schedule by November 17th. Each message contained just enough truth to sound plausible, just enough detail to seem legitimate, just enough confusion to create problems that would cascade on the actual wedding day. I also needed insurance, documentation, evidence of the chaos I was orchestrating. For that, I needed help. Alex Rodriguez lived 3 houses down from me on Maple Grove Avenue. He was 47 years old, divorced, and ran a small photography business out of his converted garage. We'd become friendly over the years. He'd helped me install a new water heater the previous winter, and I'd helped him build a deck in his backyard the summer before that. Neighbors who exchange tools and occasional beers, and the kind of casual friendship that develops between men who don't need to talk much to understand each other. I knocked on his door on a Saturday afternoon in early November. He answered wearing paint-stained cargo shorts and a t-shirt advertising a band I'd never heard of. "Steven," he said, surprised. "What's up? I have a business proposition for you." We sat on his back deck. I explained the situation. Most of it, anyway. My son's wedding. The $75,000 demand. The years of distance and disrespect. I didn't mention the revenge plan explicitly. Just said that I wanted documentation of the event, that I wasn't invited but wanted to know what happened, that I was willing to pay for professional photography from a distance. Alex had listened without interrupting. When I finished, he'd leaned back in his chair and whistled low. "That's rough, man. Your own kid's wedding. $4,500, I said. Cash. For discreet photography from outside the venue. You stay in the parking area, use a telephoto lens, document what happens. No interaction with guests. No one knows you're there." He'd studied me for a long moment. "You want me to crash your son's wedding? I want you to photograph a public event from public property. There's a difference. $4,500 is a lot of money. It's important to me." He'd agreed. We shook hands. I paid him half up front, $2,250 in cash that I'd withdrawn from my savings in small increments over the previous 2 weeks. The rest would come after he delivered the photographs. I had one more call to make, the most important one. Derek's professional network was surprisingly easy to access. LinkedIn, Facebook, industry conferences, tech meetups. He'd built his career on visibility, on being known and connected and respected within Charleston's software engineering community. CloudSync Solutions had a public directory of employees. Derek was listed as Director of Product Development, with an email address and phone extension. I didn't call Derek's company directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I called people who worked with Derek. Colleagues, professional contacts, people whose email addresses and phone numbers were available through public records and business directories. The conversations were brief and carefully calibrated. "Hi, this is Stephen Caldwell, Derek's father. I'm trying to reach him about a family matter, but I haven't been able to get through. Have you noticed if he's been acting differently lately? I'm concerned about his financial situation." To one colleague, "I've heard some concerning things about gambling debts. Have you noticed Derek stressed about money?" To another, "There are some family issues around debt. I'm worried he might have overextended himself. Has he mentioned anything to you?" I never said anything explicitly false. Never made specific accusations. Just planted seeds. Expressed concern. Asked questions that implied problems without stating them directly. The tech community in Charleston was smaller than people realized. Tight-knit. Gossip traveled fast. By early November, I'd heard through a mutual acquaintance that people were talking. "Have you heard about Derek Caldwell? His dad's worried about his finances. Something about gambling, or maybe bad investments." The rumors were vague enough to spread quickly, specific enough to cause doubt. Some of them reached vendors. A caterer mentioned to an assistant that they were concerned about final payment from the Caldwellchan wedding. A florist asked for payment upfront instead of the standard 50% deposit. Everything was in motion. The system was primed to fail. November 18th arrived with rain. Heavy, persistent, the kind of cold autumn downpour that turns everything gray and makes the world feel smaller. I hadn't planned the weather. Couldn't have controlled it if I tried. but it felt like the universe was paying attention, adding its own dramatic emphasis to the chaos I'd orchestrated. I stayed home that day, made coffee in my ancient percolator, sat at my cracked formica table, waited for Alex's first text message. It arrived at 11:37 a.m. Arrived at venue. Setup looks chaotic. Vendors arguing with the state coordinator. At 12:15 p.m., florist just arrived. 3 hours late. She's yelling at someone on her phone. At 1:03 p.m., caterers are here but there's no setup crew. They're just standing in the rain looking confused. At 1:47 p.m., string quartet packed up and left. They said they waited an hour and no one told them about any schedule changes. At 2:23 p.m., guests starting to arrive. Parking lot is a mess. Nobody's directing traffic. I made myself a sandwich. Turkey on wheat bread, $2.67 worth of ingredients. Ate it slowly. Checked my phone obsessively. At 2:56 p.m., inside the venue now. Managed to get past security by pretending to be early vendor. Steven, this is bad. Really bad. Half the hall isn't decorated. Chairs everywhere but no organization. Floral arrangements incomplete. I can see Vanessa crying near the entrance. My phone rang at 3:14 p.m. Derek's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Dad. His voice was tight, strained, barely controlled panic bleeding through each word. Dad, I need you to call me back immediately. The wedding is falling apart. The estate manager is threatening to shut down the entire event because we're $8,000 short on the final payment and none of the vendors are coordinated and guests are laughing and please, Dad, please just wire the money. $8,000. That's all we need to salvage this. Please. I deleted the voicemail, made another cup of coffee. At 3:42 p.m., another call, another voicemail. Please, Dad, everything's wrong. The florist is 3 hours late. The caterers can't set up because the tables aren't arranged. Half the centerpieces are missing. Guests are starting to leave. People are taking pictures and posting them online. This is destroying us. Vanessa's hysterical. Her parents are threatening to leave. Just wire the money. Please. I'm begging you. I listened to his voice crack on the word, begging. Felt nothing. Or maybe felt everything all at once. Too much to process into any single emotion. At 4:19 p.m., you're doing this on purpose, aren't you? You sabotaged our wedding. You're punishing us because we asked you to contribute like a real father should. This is sick, Dad. This is cruel. Wire the money or I swear to God I'll never speak to you again. I saved that voicemail. Listened to it 3 times. Alex's texts continued throughout the afternoon. Each one a fragment of the disaster unfolding at Westmont Manor. Guests leaving early. Vendors packing up. The estate coordinator shouting at Derek about breach of contract. Vanessa's mother crying in the parking lot. The rain getting heavier, turning the manicured gardens into mud, soaking everyone who'd been forced to wait outside because the ceremony kept getting delayed. At 6:47 p.m., they're doing a bare-bones ceremony now. Maybe 20 people left. No decorations. No music. No food. Just Derek and Vanessa standing in front of an officiant who looks like he wants to be anywhere else. This is the saddest thing I've ever photographed. At 7:23 p.m., it's over. Estate coordinator shut it down. Police showed up because of some dispute about payment. Everyone's leaving. Derek and Vanessa are sitting in their car in the parking lot. She's still in her wedding dress. They've been sitting there for 20 minutes just staring at the steering wheel. At 8:02 p.m., heading home. Got about 300 photos. We'll have them ready for you tomorrow. Steven, I don't know what happened between you and your son, but this was brutal. You sure you want to see these? I texted back, yes, thank you. The doorbell rang at 9:34 p.m. Through the window, I could see Derek's BMW in my driveway, headlights cutting through the rain. 2 figures on my front porch. Derek in his dress shirt and suit pants, tie loosened and hanging crooked, hair plastered to his skull from the rain. Vanessa beside him, still wearing her wedding gown with a wool coat thrown over it. mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers, the bottom 6 inches of her dress dark and heavy with mud and water. They looked destroyed, exhausted, humiliated, everything I'd hoped to see and somehow less satisfying than I'd imagined. I opened the door, didn't invite them in, just stood there in my doorway, warm and dry, while they shivered in the November rain. "The wedding's ruined," Derek said. No preamble, no greeting, just the flat statement of fact. Half the vendors left, guests scattered. The estate shut us down. We managed a bare-bones ceremony with 17 people before they kicked us out entirely. "I heard it was nice weather for November," I said. Vanessa made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "Nice weather? It's a monsoon. Everything's destroyed. The decorations, the flowers, my dress, our reputation." "Please wire the money," Derek interrupted. $8,000 to cover the final estate payment. We can salvage the reception at least. Book a restaurant for next weekend. Have the vendors come back. Fix this." "Why would I do that?" Derek's face twisted, confusion giving way to anger. "Because you're my father. Because family helps family. Because you owe us." "I owe you." My voice came out colder than I'd intended. "I owe you $75,000 for a wedding I wasn't invited to? For a party celebrating your marriage to a woman who can't even be bothered to say hello when I bring you food? For an event where 300 guests were more important than the man who raised you? Dad, would you value me without my wallet, Derek?" The question hung in the rain-soaked air. Derek opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "Of course, your family. But success means maintaining standards. We have a certain life now, and that requires money," I finished. "It requires money. My money, specifically. Money I don't have because I spent everything trying to save your mother. Money I'll never have because I chose to be an engineer instead of a tech director. Money that apparently determines my worth as a father and a human being." Vanessa stepped forward, her voice desperate. "We didn't mean it like that. The wedding planning, the stress, we weren't thinking clearly. But the honeymoon's already booked. We've lost $9,000 in deposits. The vendors are keeping another $13,000 because we couldn't coordinate properly. We're financially destroyed. Please, think of us." "I have been thinking of you," I said, "for 33 years. Every time I skipped lunch to save money for your college textbooks. Every time I worked a double shift to pay for your baseball equipment. Every Christmas I spent alone because you were too busy for your embarrassing poor father. I've thought about nothing but you, Derek. And you know what I realized? You've never thought about me at all." "That's not true. You called me once after your mother died. Once. To tell me I should have done more to save her. To blame me for not being wealthy enough to buy her more time. You took my grief and my guilt and my exhaustion and you weaponized it. Made me feel like I'd failed at the only thing that mattered. I was angry. You were cruel. There's a difference." I stepped back, started to close the door. "Go home, Derek. You and Vanessa can figure out your financial problems without me. Consider it a learning experience." "Wait." Derek's voice cracked. "Dad, please. I regret it. All of it. The things I said about Mom. The way I've treated you. The wedding demands. I was wrong. I'm sorry." I paused. Looked at my son standing on my porch in his ruined wedding clothes. Rain pouring down around him. Everything he'd built crumbling in real time. Part of me wanted to believe him. Wanted to think that this disaster had taught him something about priorities and family and the difference between wealth and worth. But I remembered 8 years of silence. 8 years of rejection. 8 years of being treated like an ATM machine instead of a father. And I knew that Derek's regret wasn't about hurting me. It was about the consequences. About the humiliation. About the money he'd lost and the reputation he'd damaged and the perfect life that had fallen apart. "No," I said. "This is the consequence. Greed has a price. Disrespect has a price. Using family as a piggy bank has a price. You wanted $75,000 from me. Instead, you got a lesson about what matters. I hope it was worth it." "You're destroying us," Derek said. And now his voice rose. anger replacing desperation. Guests are spreading stories all over Charleston. Vanessa's family thinks we're incompetent. My colleagues are laughing. The vendors are keeping our deposits. We've lost over $30,000. Are you happy? Is this what you wanted? I wanted a son who valued me for more than my bank account, I said. I wanted to be invited to your wedding. I wanted you to call me on my birthday, or Christmas, or any random Tuesday just to talk. I wanted you to remember that your mother loved you more than anything, and that I tried my best even when it wasn't enough. That's what I wanted. What I got was a $75,000 invoice and a note telling me to be grateful for the privilege of being excluded. I closed the door, locked it, walked back to my kitchen and sat at my cracked formica table. Through the window, I watched Derek and Vanessa stand on my porch for another minute before giving up. Their car lights swept across my living room as they backed out of my driveway. The red taillights disappeared into the rain. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. I'd won, executed my revenge perfectly, destroyed Derek's perfect wedding, and taught him the lesson he'd refused to learn through years of gentler attempts at connection. So why did I feel so empty? Alex delivered the photographs the next morning. 347 images on a USB drive, each one documenting another moment of the disaster. Guests arriving and looking confused. Vendors arguing with the estate coordinator. The half-decorated ballroom with its scattered chairs and incomplete floral arrangements. Derek and Vanessa standing in the rain, expressions moving from frustration to panic to despair. One photograph in particular caught my attention. Derek standing alone near the entrance to Westmont Manor, phone pressed to his ear, face contorted in some emotion I couldn't quite name. Anguish, maybe, or realization. The exact moment he understood that his father wasn't going to save him, that the safety net he'd always assumed existed had disappeared. I paid Alex the remaining $2,250. He didn't ask questions, just handed over the USB drive and told me to call if I needed anything else. Over the following week, I learned the full extent of the damage. Alex had contacts in the Charleston wedding industry, people who knew people who'd worked the Caldwellchan disaster. The stories spread through the vendor network, each retelling slightly more dramatic than the last. Derek and Vanessa had forfeited $22,000 in non-refundable deposits. The florist kept $3,000. The caterer kept $7,000. The string quartet kept $1,500. Maya Cross Photography kept the full $8,000 because her contract specified payment regardless of schedule changes. The Maui Resort kept $9,000 for the honeymoon suite they'd canceled too late to get a refund. Total losses, $31,500. More than twice what they'd owed the estate coordinator. More than Derek's annual car payment. More than Vanessa had spent on her engagement ring. But the financial damage was only part of it. The real destruction was reputational. Charleston's social circles weren't large, especially among successful young professionals. Stories spread. The disastrous Caldwellchan wedding became shorthand for poor planning and family dysfunction. Vanessa's Instagram followers dropped by 40% in 2 weeks. Derek's LinkedIn connections started unfollowing him. One of Derek's colleagues, a woman named Jennifer Marsh who I'd spoken to about Derek's financial concerns, later told a mutual friend that CloudSync Solutions had quietly removed Derek from a major client presentation because they were worried about his personal instability affecting professional judgment. The wedding that was supposed to launch Derek and Vanessa into Charleston's elite social circles had instead made them a cautionary tale. Maya Cross Photography removed all reference to their wedding from her portfolio. Sterling Culinary stopped responding to Vanessa's emails about rescheduling. Westmont Manor blacklisted them permanently, citing breach of contract and unprofessional conduct. Alex, ironically, gained 4 new photography clients from the disaster. Guests who'd been impressed by his discreet documentation and had asked for his business card, not knowing he'd been hired by the excluded father to capture his revenge. I kept the USB drive in my desk drawer, looked at the photographs occasionally, trying to feel satisfaction or vindication or closure. Mostly I just felt tired. On December 3rd, I burned the original invoices in my fireplace, watched the expensive cardstock curl and blacken, the embossed letterhead dissolving into ash, the FedEx envelope, Derek's handwritten note, the itemized bills for Westmont Manor and Sterling Culinary and Paradise Maui. All of it reduced to carbon and memory. The fire burned cleanly. No smoke. Just heat and light and the quiet destruction of paper. A week later, I received a letter. Not an email or a text. An actual physical letter, postmarked from Charleston, addressed in unfamiliar handwriting. I opened it at my kitchen table, expecting another invoice or legal threat or final attempt at extraction. Instead, I found a note from Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, a woman I'd met exactly twice. Once at a charity event Rachel had dragged me to in 2014, and once at her funeral in 2016. She'd been one of Rachel's distant friends, the kind of person who sent Christmas cards and occasionally appeared at social gatherings but never became close. Stephen, the letter read, I heard about the situation with Derek's wedding. The rumors have spread through several social circles, and I wanted to reach out. Your stand reminded me to value real connections over superficial ones. My own family has struggled with similar dynamics, and seeing you set boundaries gave me courage to do the same. Would you like to meet for coffee? On me. I think we might have more in common than I realized. Eleanor. I set the letter aside, picked it up again. Read it 3 times. Someone had heard about my revenge and called it a stand. Someone had interpreted my calculated destruction of Derek's wedding as setting boundaries instead of being cruel. Someone wanted to buy me coffee. I didn't know what to do with that information. Christmas came and went. For the first time in 8 years, I didn't drive to Derek's apartment with homemade food. Didn't send a card with a $20 bill tucked inside. Just stayed home, watched basketball games I didn't care about, ate a turkey sandwich alone at my cracked Formica table. Derek didn't call, didn't text. The silence felt different this time. Not like rejection, like space, like the absence of pressure, like the end of something that had been dying slowly for years anyway. January arrived cold and clear. Alex knocked on my door on a Saturday morning, asked if I wanted to grab breakfast at a diner downtown. We sat in a booth with cracked vinyl seats and ordered eggs and coffee and didn't talk much. Comfortable silence. The kind you share with people who understand that not everything needs to be explained. You doing okay? He asked eventually. I don't know, I said honestly. I won, I think, but it doesn't feel like winning. Revenge usually doesn't. Then why do it? Alex shrugged. Because sometimes the alternative is letting people treat you like garbage forever. At least this way you chose to end it. I thought about that. About choice. About agency. About the difference between being a victim and being someone who fought back, even if the fight left you hollow and exhausted. Eleanor Patterson and I had coffee the following week. A nice place in Mount Pleasant. Fancier than I would have chosen. She ordered something complicated with foam. I got plain coffee. $2.37. We talked about Rachel, about Derek, about Eleanor's own children, who she described as professionally successful but emotionally distant. We talked about the pressure to fund your adult children's lifestyles, to make yourself smaller so they can feel bigger, to accept crumbs of affection in exchange for financial support. I paid for my daughter's condo, Eleanor said. $300,000. Down payment and closing costs. She sends me a text message twice a year. Birthday and Christmas. That's it. What changed? I asked. Your situation made me think. If you could say no to $75,000 and accept the consequences, maybe I could too. My son just asked me to co-sign a loan for a boat. A boat. He makes $200,000 a year and wants me to guarantee his toy. Did you say no? I said no. She smiled. Looked lighter somehow. He was furious. Accused me of not supporting his happiness. But I'm done being an ATM machine. Done measuring my worth by how much money I give away. We finished our coffee. Made plans to meet again the following week. Small victories. Small connections. Small steps toward building something that wasn't defined by money or manipulation. February brought unexpected news. A letter arrived from Derek. Another physical letter, like his generation didn't know how to write letters anymore and had to Google the format. His handwriting was neater than I remembered. Careful. like he'd practiced. Dad, it read, I've been in therapy since December. Vanessa and I are separated. She's staying with her parents. I'm in a studio apartment in West Ashley. We lost most of our savings in the wedding disaster. My job put me on probation. I'm not writing to ask for money. I'm writing to apologize. Really apologize, not just say sorry because I want something. You were right. I treated you like an ATM. I blamed you for Mom's death because it was easier than accepting that sometimes terrible things happen to good people. I was cruel and selfish and wrong. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve a response. But I needed you to know that I understand now. What you did at the wedding, I think it was the only way to make me listen. I'm sorry it took that much. Derek. I read the letter 17 times. Looked for manipulation. Found only exhaustion. I didn't respond immediately. Sat with it for 3 weeks. Let the words settle. Tried to figure out if this was genuine remorse or just another performance designed to extract sympathy. Eventually, I sent a postcard. Nothing fancy. Just a plain white card with my handwriting. Derek, I'm glad you're in therapy. I hope you find what you're looking for. We can talk when you're ready. Not about money. Just talk. Dad. He called 2 weeks later. We spoke for 6 minutes. Awkward silences punctuated by small talk about weather and work and nothing important. But at the end, before hanging up, Derek said something that made my throat tight. Mom would be disappointed in who I became, but maybe I can still fix that. Maybe, I said, if you want to. We hung up. I stared at my phone for a long time afterward. Spring arrived slowly. Charleston's harsh winter gave way to mild March temperatures and blooming azaleas. Eleanor and I started meeting weekly for coffee. Sometimes Alex joined us. We formed an accidental support group for parents recovering from toxic family dynamics. Shared stories. Gave advice. Reminded each other that setting boundaries wasn't cruelty. That protecting yourself wasn't selfishness. I started refinishing furniture again. Not because I needed the money, but because I enjoyed the work. Took pride in taking something broken and making it functional. Sold a few pieces through a local consignment shop. Made enough to cover my coffee expenses and occasional dinners out with Eleanor and Alex. Derek and I spoke every other week. Brief calls. 10 minutes maximum. He told me about therapy. I told him about furniture restoration. We didn't discuss the wedding. Didn't rehash old arguments. Just existed in each other's lives at a careful distance, testing whether we could rebuild something from the ashes. In April, Derek asked if he could visit. Not for money, not for forgiveness, just to sit at my cracked formica table and talk. Okay, I said. Saturday at 2. He arrived exactly on time. Driving a used Toyota instead of the BMW. Wearing jeans and a t-shirt instead of designer clothes. He looked thinner. Tired. More human. We sat at my kitchen table. I made coffee. He didn't ask for anything complicated. The house looks good, he said. It's the same house. I know. I never really looked at it before. Always saw what it wasn't instead of what it was. We talked for 2 hours. He told me about his separation from Vanessa, how they'd both realized their relationship had been built on image rather than substance. About his probation at work, how he'd been forced to take a step back and evaluate his priorities. About therapy and the uncomfortable process of recognizing his own toxicity. I blamed you for Mom's death because I couldn't accept that I wasn't there either, he said eventually. I was too busy building my career, too focused on success. When she got sick, I visited once. And then I made it about money because that was easier than admitting I'd abandoned her. My hands were shaking again. I gripped my coffee mug tighter. She loved you, I said. She was proud of you. She told me that before she died. I know. That's what makes it worse. We sat in silence. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a neighbor mowed their lawn. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Derek said finally. But I want to try to be better. To be someone Mom would have been proud of. Someone you don't have to fight against. Okay, I said. We can try that. He left an hour later. As he walked to his car, he turned back. "Dad? Thank you. For not giving in. For making me face consequences. It was the only thing that could have worked." I nodded, watched him drive away, went back inside and sat at my cracked formica table, alone but somehow less lonely than I'd been in years. The revenge I'd executed had cost Derek $31,500. His reputation, his marriage, and his carefully constructed image of success. It had cost me nothing financially but something intangible, the last remnants of the fantasy that we could have a relationship without addressing the dysfunction between us. What I'd gained was harder to quantify. Dignity, maybe, self-respect, the knowledge that I wouldn't be exploited anymore, that I'd drawn a line and enforced it. The beginning of something that might eventually resemble an honest relationship with my son. The invoices I'd burned in December had represented more than money. They'd represented years of accumulated resentment, of being made to feel less than, of sacrificing my own well-being for a son who measured my worth in dollars. Watching them turn to ash had been cathartic in a way I couldn't fully articulate. Eleanor called the whole situation expensive therapy. She wasn't wrong. Derek had paid $31,000 to learn what love wasn't. I paid nothing but 8 years of loneliness to learn what love required. Summer approached. Eleanor invited me to a gallery opening. Alex asked me to help with a photography workshop he was organizing. Derek called every week now, sometimes twice. We were building something, slowly, carefully, with appropriate boundaries and honest conversations and the understanding that repairing years of damage wouldn't happen overnight. The cracked formica table remained cracked. I thought about replacing it dozens of times but never had. Rachel had loved that table, had served thousands of meals on it, had done crossword puzzles there every Sunday morning while I made pancakes. Derek had done his homework there, built science projects, eaten birthday cake. The crack was part of its history. Trying to hide it or fix it felt dishonest. Better to acknowledge the damage and work around it. Build new memories on top of old ones. Learn to love imperfect things. In August, Derek helped me install new kitchen cabinets. We worked together for 6 hours, measuring and drilling and problem-solving the way I'd taught him when he was 12, and we'd built a treehouse in the backyard. He was better with tools than I remembered. More patient. "I'm thinking about switching careers," he said while we were leveling the upper cabinets. "Maybe teaching. High school engineering or computer science. Something that matters more than profit margins." That's a big change. Yeah, but I'm tired of the tech world. The constant networking and image management and pretending to care about things that don't matter. I want to do something real. "Mom would like that," I said. He paused, set down his drill. "Yeah, she would." We finished the cabinets as the sun set, ordered pizza, sat at the cracked formica table and ate straight from the box like we used to when he was a kid. The conversation flowed easier now, less performed, more genuine. "I'm sorry it took so long," Derek said, "to understand what mattered." "I'm sorry too," I said, "for a lot of things. For not being wealthier. For not being able to save your mom. For executing revenge instead of just talking to you. The revenge was necessary. Talking wouldn't have worked. I was too far gone. Maybe." We cleaned up together. He left around 10. Hugged me at the door. A real hug, not the performative kind. Said he'd call during the week. I went back inside. Looked at my new kitchen cabinets. Solid oak, properly installed, functional and beautiful. Derek had insisted on paying for the materials. $237. Not a lot, but offered freely, without expectation of return. Progress came slowly. Some weeks were better than others. Derek canceled plans occasionally when therapy or work became overwhelming. I tried not to take it personally. Tried to remember that rebuilding trust was a process, not a destination. Eleanor and Alex and I continued our weekly coffee meetings. We'd expanded to include 2 other people. A man named Robert whose son had stolen his identity to open credit cards, and a woman named Patricia whose daughter demanded she give up her retirement condo to house the daughter's growing family. Our little support group provided something none of us had found elsewhere: permission to protect ourselves without guilt. By October, Derek had been accepted into a teaching certification program at the College of Charleston. He'd sold his remaining tech stock options, paid off his debts, and moved into a smaller apartment that he could afford without stretching. Vanessa had moved to Atlanta for a fresh start. Their divorce was proceeding amicably, both of them relieved to be released from the performance of their failed marriage. "I think I'm going to be okay," Derek told me during one of our weekly calls. "Not perfect, but okay." "Okay is enough," I said. November 18th, 2025. Exactly 1 year after the wedding disaster, Derek asked if he could take me to dinner. Nothing fancy. A barbecue place downtown where the pulled pork was excellent and the atmosphere was casual. We sat at a picnic table on the outdoor patio. The November evening was cool but comfortable. Derek ordered us both plates of ribs and sweet tea. We ate and talked about nothing important. His teaching program, my furniture projects, Eleanor's upcoming trip to visit her sister. Near the end of the meal, Derek pulled out an envelope. Plain white, no embossing. He slid it across the table. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it." Inside was a check for $4,500. Made out to me. Signed by Derek. "That's what you paid Alex," Derek said. "For the photography. I did some research. Found out about your arrangement with him. You spent money you couldn't afford to document my failure. I want to pay you back." I stared at the check. "How did you find out?" "Alex told me. We ran into each other at a coffee shop last month. Started talking. He felt guilty about taking your money and thought I should know. I'm not angry. I would have done the same thing in your position." "I can't accept this," I said, trying to hand it back. "Yes, you can. You paid for documentation because you knew I wouldn't listen any other way. Consider this repayment for an expensive lesson I desperately needed." I looked at my son. At this man who'd blamed me for his mother's death, who'd demanded $75,000 and excluded me from his wedding, who'd called me cruel and vindictive when his perfect day collapsed. At this same man who'd spent a year in therapy, who called me every week, who helped install kitchen cabinets and talked about becoming a teacher. "Keep half," I said. "Put the other half in a savings account. For emergencies." "Dad, that's the deal. Take it or I tear up the check." He smiled. A real smile, the kind I hadn't seen since he was a kid. "Deal." We finished our meal. He drove me home. At my door, he hugged me again. Longer this time. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself." "That's what fathers do," I said. "Even stubborn, poor, imperfect ones." He laughed. Promised to call during the week. Drove away in his used Toyota. I went inside. Deposited the check the next morning. $2,250. Enough to cover my property taxes for the year. Enough to buy new tires for my Civic. Enough to take Eleanor and Alex to a nice dinner as a thank you for their friendship. The rest of the check, Derek's half, went into a savings account at Charleston Regional Credit Union. I checked on it occasionally through online banking. Watched it grow slowly as Derek added small deposits. $20 here, $50 there. Building something for himself instead of demanding I provide everything. Winter settled over Charleston. Rachel's birthday came and went on December 9th. Derek and I visited her grave together, brought flowers, stood in silence for a while. He cried. I held his hand. We didn't talk much. Didn't need to. Christmas was different this year. Derek came to my house in the morning. Brought bagels and cream cheese. We ate breakfast at the cracked Formica table, opened modest presents. I gave him a set of woodworking tools. He gave me a framed photograph of Rachel from before she got sick, smiling in our backyard on a summer afternoon I'd forgotten. "Found it in a box of old photos at my apartment," he said. "Thought you might want it." I did. Hung it in my living room where I could see it every day. Rachel smiling. Rachel healthy. Rachel alive in a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy. The year ended quietly. No drama. No invoices. No revenge plots. Just the slow, difficult work of rebuilding something that had been destroyed. I thought sometimes about the wedding disaster. About the chaos I'd orchestrated. The vendors I'd confused. the money Derek and Vanessa had lost. About standing in my doorway while my son begged me for help and me refusing. Closing the door on him. Watching his car disappear into the storm. I didn't regret it. Couldn't afford to. The alternative had been continuing the cycle. Derek demanding, me providing, nothing changing except my bank account shrinking and his disrespect growing. The wedding disaster had been a disruption. A forced reset. The only language Derek had been capable of understanding at that point in his life. But I was glad it was over. Glad we'd moved past it. Glad that Derek had used the disaster as a catalyst for genuine change instead of just temporary regret. Eleanor said once that revenge was like chemotherapy. Toxic but sometimes necessary. Destroying everything in its path but occasionally saving the patient. Did it save you? She'd asked. I don't know, I'd said. But it stopped the bleeding. Spring arrived again. Derek completed his teaching certification. Got hired at a public high school in North Charleston to teach engineering fundamentals. He was nervous and excited and more animated than I'd seen him in years. The pay is terrible, he admitted. But I actually care about what I'm doing. He invited me to his classroom for parent night. I went. Stood in the back and watched him explain basic circuitry to a room full of teenagers who were maybe 20% paying attention. He was patient, encouraging, good at breaking down complex concepts into understandable pieces. A girl raised her hand. Mr. Caldwell, why do we need to learn this? I'm never going to use circuits in real life. Derek smiled. My dad was a mechanical engineer for 40 years. He taught me that understanding how things work makes you better at fixing things when they break. Not just machines. Anything. Relationships. Problems. Life. You learn the system, understand the components, and suddenly you can solve things that seemed impossible. He caught my eye across the room, nodded slightly. After the presentation, as parents and students filed out, Derek introduced me to several colleagues. This is my dad, Stephen. He's the reason I'm teaching instead of still pretending to care about tech startups. We drove to a diner afterward. Same place we'd had breakfast the previous Christmas. Ordered coffee and pie. Talked about his students, about the challenges of teaching kids who didn't see the point of education, about finding meaning in work that didn't pay well but mattered. Mom would be proud, I said. Yeah, Derek said. I think she would be. The revenge I'd executed had cost Derek his wedding, his marriage, his reputation, and $31,500. It had taught him that actions have consequences, that treating people like ATM machines destroys relationships, that you can't buy respect or love or family bonds. But more than that, it had created space. Space for both of us to step back from the toxic dynamic we'd built over 8 years. Space for Derek to hit bottom and climb back up. Space for me to establish boundaries and mean them. Space for both of us to decide who we wanted to be instead of who we'd been. The victory wasn't about the money. Never had been. It was about dignity reclaimed. About a father teaching his son that respect cannot be bought. And family bonds broken by greed carry consequences that last far longer than any bank transaction. Derek's $75,000 demand had cost him far more than money. It had cost him his carefully constructed image, his marriage, his professional reputation. But it had also cost him the armor he'd built around himself. The belief that wealth and success were the only things that mattered, that family was transactional, that love could be measured in wire transfers and invoices. What he'd gained was harder to see but more valuable. Self-awareness, humility, the beginning of authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial extraction. The chance to become someone his mother would have been proud of. I'd gained something too, the knowledge that I could set boundaries and enforce them, that I didn't have to accept crumbs of affection in exchange for financial support, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst behavior. The cracked Formica table sat in my kitchen. The new cabinets Derek and I had installed together hung solid and true. Rachel's photograph smiled from my living room wall. Small victories, small connections, small steps toward building something that would last. Derek called every week, visited twice a month, helped with projects around the house. We weren't perfect, probably never would be, But we were trying. Building something real from the ashes of what had burned. That was enough. More than enough. If you liked this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions in the comments below.